the host.
So I think people know that I've been quite active in the housing movement in Northern Michigan. I'm sure Emily will talk about it, but we're really in a situation with what we're calling a housing crisis and a big shortage of housing, especially for our workforce and people trying to work, live, and make a living in our communities. So I'm on the board for a group called Housing North, which is headquartered out of Traverse City. And then we've had a grassroots group locally called the Little Traverse Bay Housing Partnership. And through some nice support from the Fry Foundation and the Petoskey Harbor Springs Area Community Foundation, we've been able to support a part-time staff person for that. And we were so lucky. I can't emphasize how lucky we were to land Emily Meyerson for that role. She's just perfect. Has background as a planner and used to do planning for the county as well as Bear Creek Township. And then she's also served on the Petoskey Planning Commission for a long, long time. And so she has great experience. She can also put a deal together. She also does work in the world of trail development in the state of Michigan. So like I said, we were so lucky to land Emily as our program director. And I invited her to come to speak to our club just to give you an update on what's going on with housing in Emmett County. So with that, Emily Meyerson, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Good morning, everyone. It's been a while since I've visited Petoskey Morning Rotary, so it's great to be here. I will share my screen. Let me see if I can get this to work. Okay, can you see full screen?
Yep, we can see it, Emily, and it's full screen. Yep.
Full screen, great. You never know. It's always odd when you're doing these things. So as Carlin said, I work with Housing North in the Little Traverse Bay Housing Partnership. It's a really unique situation where there's a regional, Housing North is a regional nonprofit trying to help solve our housing issues in the region, which is a great group because they can do more statewide advocacy. And then I work with the Little Traverse Bay Housing Partnership, which is a local group of people that just are trying to solve our housing issues. So just a little bit about Housing North. They basically have 3 pillars of building awareness, which is what I'm doing today. Advocacy, which they're doing a lot on statewide issues, which I'll talk a little bit about. Being in rural areas, typically we lose out a lot of times on funding because it's going to urban areas. And then capacity and resources, which is sort of, they help build capacity, which is one of the things that I'm doing as well. So they're a great organization. So what is our problem? People, if you have a house, a lot of times you don't realize that there's other problems out there. And basically it's a workforce issue. We have workforce problems. I think everybody knows that in all levels. It's hard to get people to work at our hospitals and businesses and trade organizations. And it's because we don't have housing, and we're really in a bit of a housing crisis at this point. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So why is housing important? Really, when it comes down to it, it's all about the economy. It really is. If we don't have a place for people to live, you can't retain and attract workforce. You also can't retain and attract employers to come to our community and open businesses. You can't attract young people and families if they don't have a place to live or an affordable place to live. It's really difficult for seniors to age in place or to shift to a smaller unit. Maybe they're in a big house and they want to go to a smaller house, but there aren't any available. So they're forced to move out of the area. Reduce long commutes. This is a really important piece I'll talk a little bit more about, but if you have to drive a long way to get to your job, you're also losing out on what I call social capital, people investing other time into your community as a volunteer or showing up at the schools or mental and physical health if they're in that. So it's really an economic issue. So we need more housing. And so the really easy thing is just think, well, it's just, supply and demand, just build it. But of course, it's not that easy. If it was, we wouldn't be in a crisis, right? So what are the barriers? First off, our construction costs in this part of the state are higher than anywhere else. We are up to about $300 a square foot this summer. I think that was unusual, but I think a typical was $250 to $280 a square foot. So simple math, 1,000 square foot home at $250 a square foot, that's $250,000 just for the house. That doesn't include the infrastructure, the land, everything else that goes into it. So pretty much you can't build 1,000 square foot house in the Petoskey area for under $400,000 to sell at market rate. There's a high cost of property. There's a high cost or lack of infrastructure. If you think about how our communities develop, they're small and compact. So our infrastructure is primarily in those small and compact areas that have been built out already. So it's hard to, it's costly to extend that. We have labor shortages in our trades, and most of those folks in the trades are working on the high profit margins of vacation homes. We have zoning that was really developed in the mid 1950s and really isn't for today. And so it restricts a lot of homes that can be built, the amount and numbers that can be built. There's public opposition to housing developments. We have an issue up here with long-term rentals leaving the market for short-term rentals. We've all stayed probably in Airbnbs, and that's a big issue. We also, in our area, which is unique, is we have a huge increase in the percent of our homes that are for second home markets. So that's a big deal. We also have a change in demographics. People have said, well, our population hasn't increased, so how are we in such a short supply of homes? Well, one is the second home market, but also there's a change in demographics. We have, if you think about it, 30 years ago, most households had about 2.8 people per household, and now we're at about 1.8 people per household. So that's a significant change in demographics. And then our state programs are really designed for urban areas. So that's one of the issues where I was talking about statewide to try to change some of those policies. So when we talk about housing and costs, what are the goals? I think a lot of people, like you always heard 30% of your household income is what you shouldn't go more than 30% of your household income for your housing. Or you've heard the number 2.6 times your household income if you're buying a house. I think another really important one we need to think about that I just learned about when I started this position is that 45% of your household income shouldn't go to housing and transportation costs. And this becomes really important if you start to think about people buying houses farther away. It's easy to say, well, I can buy a house in Sheboygan that's 2.6 times my household income, so I'll just live there and commute to Petoskey. But then you have to add in your cost of transportation. And I'll give some information about why that becomes so important. So in Emmett County right now, 26% of our households spend over 30% on housing. And when I first saw this number, I'm like, that's not really that terrible. It's not good, but it's not that terrible. But you have to remember that's if you have housing, because we have two issues right now. We don't have enough housing, but we also don't have affordable housing. So that's if you live in Emmett County and you have housing. So we have to remember that there's a lot of people that don't. So when we look at the housing plus transportation index, we actually have 92% of the workforce in Emmett County spending more than 45% on their housing plus their transportation costs. And this was a number for me that was just staggering, because what that says is people are commuting from far away. They're driving to get here. And as I said, you lose out on a lot of other things if people are in the car for a couple hours a day. And then you also lose out when we talk about economics. If you're spending that much money on your housing plus your transportation, you're not spending that on local stores and businesses. And so it also feeds back into some of our economic issues. When I talk about housing too, I want to say I'm talking about all housing. I'm not just talking about subsidized housing. It seems like a lot of times when I start talking about housing issues, people assume it's all subsidized housing we're talking about. But honestly, we need housing for everyone in our workforce. The only thing in Emmett County we really don't need are the people that aren't in our workforce, the second homeowners that are here vacationing, or maybe the 1 million+ households. And I'll get into some of those numbers of what types of housing we need and who it's for. But I bring this slide up not to read every number, but to just talk about a little bit when I start talking about types of housing we need and who it's for. These are some of just general costs of general salaries and rents of what people can afford. And it's what makes our community tick. It's our firefighters, it's our EMTs, it's our childcare workers, it's our teachers and our nurses. And so you can see different salaries in here that these are all people that need houses. And when I start showing some of the numbers, you'll see that we don't have affordable housing available for pretty much anyone in our workforce. So when we look at this 2.6 number as well, so we have our area median incomes in 2019 for 1, 2, and 4 person households. And if you times that by 2.6, your affordable home value is between $123,000 and $176,000 a year. And if you know, I mean, your home value, what you could afford. And I think if you know anything about housing in Emmett County, you can't find a house in those prices. At the end of 2020, the home value, the median home value was $250,000 in Emmett County. So again, that's if you can find a house. You obviously can't find a house that you can afford for pretty much anyone in our workforce. So how many houses do we need? So this was, you know, a big question when people started working on the housing issue, like everyone to know how much do we actually need? So Housing North had a target market analysis completed, and it's very detailed, and I can send you the link of the full report. It's quite interesting. I'm going to give you a summary of some of the issues here in Emmett County. What it stated today, so this isn't planning for the future. What we need today is we need over 2,200 new housing units in Emmett County, over 1,800 rental units, and 460 new houses. That's a lot of houses. Of the rental units, we need over 1,200 in that lower range of about under $650 a month, or about 26 for incomes about $26,000 a year. So those are going to be more of your subsidized types of housing. But we also need over 400 units for those salaries between $28,000 and $40,000 a year. And we also need over 170 units for those incomes of over $42,000 a year. So this is everyone in our workforce. We have a shortage. Of the 460 new homes, we need over 180 in that lower income level, a housing price of under 150,000. But we also need almost 200 units of housing values between 175,000 and $250,000 a year. So very interesting. The target market analysis also did, they separated out the municipalities. So since this was Petoskey, I thought I'd share the city of Petoskey data. This isn't in addition to the 2,200 units, it's within the 2,200 units. But it said the city of Petoskey needs over 400 new rental units at that 650 rent, and 87 new units of between 700 and 1,000. And it also needed 78 new homes. So it's interesting to think about, because I think a lot of people think, well, Petoskey's built out, you know, where can you possibly put all these new homes? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So we know we need more housing, and what can we do about it? And when it comes down to it, honestly, there's no single answer. And this is why I'm out here talking to you in the morning. I've been talking to different governments, different groups. It's because we all have to work together, because this is an issue. If we don't have houses, we don't really have a future. I mean, our schools are gonna suffer, our workforce, our hospitals gonna suffer. So it's a crisis need that we all need to work together. So there's lots of different solutions, but there is no one single solution. There isn't building one huge development. That's not what we're looking at doing. It's lots of different types of development. So grants and low interest loans, our solutions. Land donation would really help, because that reduces that cost to bring the cost down to actually build the house at an affordable level. Tax incentives, building public support and understanding on housing, which is why I'm here. legislative and policy changes I was talking about, training and apprenticeships to build capacity in our trades, to have more tradespeople, public-private partnerships, all different types of housing types, from large multiple family to infill developments, duplexes. And that means changing zoning and being more open to new ideas in different types of housing in different places. Having year-round housing incentives, which there are programs that to do that, as well as short-term rental regulations. And I think what's really interesting, if you don't know, the city of Petoskey actually has short-term rental regulations. They're one of the only communities in the county that does. And if you look at the numbers of short-term rentals, Petoskey is one of the only places that the numbers didn't skyrocket this last year. They stayed stable because they were able to control that, which was very good. So for the Petoskey area in particular, every community has a little bit different challenges. A big thing is this vacation and seasonal home market. Our homes going into what I call like sort of our neighborhoods become ghost communities where nobody lives in them in the wintertime. That's really bad for our local economy. High land values is a challenge, a decrease in household size, the high cost of building, the idea that there's no room to grow, and then zoning limitations is really an issue. So what I just wanted to bring up some maps because people always like maps is, so this is the city of Petoskey. If you don't know, that blue line is your municipal boundary. Most of the colors except the salmon color are public land. So we have a lot of public land in the city of Petoskey between our college and our public schools, as well as, great park system and our tribal lands in the area. So those are things just to keep in mind. Are they being used at their highest and best use, or could they be used for something different? The salmon color are vacant lands. So right now in the city of Petoskey, that orange color is vacant land. So there are some lands that you could develop into housing. But then I started thinking about, well, we also have a lot of houses that that peach colored salmon color is places where we may have one house on a property that is actually big enough to split into maybe a bunch more houses, to have more houses on it. So, start thinking that's what infill development is. How can we fill in the city of Petoskey where we already have water and sewer and road structure so you can have more density? That's what it was built for. And then you have to start thinking, we have some other things just to think a little more outside the box. We have downtowns with empty second floors and third floors. How can you fill that in? We have commercial strip malls that aren't doing well, or what I always say, parking lots with some of the best views in Petoskey. How can we fill those in and make those better for housing? We also have what was an incredible industrial district along our river that's changing, and we haven't really had industry along it. And how can that change? So there are opportunities within the city of Petoskey and the surrounding area where we have infrastructure to make some of those changes. So I like to just bring this up because I think especially for non-planners, I'm a planner, we've been talking about this for a long time. People don't think about it. I think it opens a lot of people's minds. It's called missing middle housing, and it actually isn't new. And it isn't necessarily about income, it's about housing type and form. So if you look on this picture, you see the white building on either end. We have single family on one end and multiple family on the other end. And if you know anything about zoning, they created single family districts and multiple family districts. So honestly, that's what we have today. But historically, we had all these different housing types. All those yellow things in the middle existed. And if you go in our cities, they exist all over. You have duplexes, fourplexes, eightplexes, townhouses, courtyard apartment buildings. So those all existed, but zoning sort of made it difficult for them to exist. And so over time, they've sort of gone away. So the idea of missing middle housing is it's a way to increase density in your towns. It's, maybe taking a single family house and making it into a duplex, or maybe it's taking a vacant lot and putting in an eightplex building in there. So there are different ways to do it, but part of our problems is we're sort of now used to this old style of zoning. And, I heard a great quote that is like thinking about zoning that was done in the mid 1950s is sort of taking this old operating system. We keep trying to update it, but just like a computer, sometimes you just need to get rid of it and start fresh. So new ideas need to happen instead of just trying to take what was always there. So a typical example is something like this. Again, the yellow are new buildings. So you look at form instead of density. You know, the orange buildings on this picture are new buildings on vacant lots that went in, and they might be an apartment building or a duplex, but the form and scale fit in. And when I talked about reducing your house, the reduction in our household sizes, you know, we used to have houses that had 10 people living in them. Most of those houses have 1 to 3 or 4 people living in them. So is the density really any different? And it's just to think about that. And even more interesting, if you look in the city of Petoskey, we have tons of existing missing middle housing that exists all over. And that existed before zoning and would be difficult to build today. You have duplexes. Let's see, we have, these are side-by-side duplex, an apartment building, an accessory dwelling unit, an up-down duplex is what these two are, and a fourplex. And then this actually isn't in Petoskey, it's in Harbor Springs, but it's a cabin court and it exists today. So those are all different types of missing middle. And I just like to bring it up because I think it's interesting. And if zoning changes do happen, it might open some people's minds to be okay with them because it is different. So what can the Petoskey area do? A big thing is to start looking at their zoning. They are in the midst of changing and adopting a new master plan and hoping after that they can start making some of these zoning changes to allow for that. Year-round housing incentives, that's something that I really believe is important for our whole area to have something like a deed restriction program to require people to live there year-round. So we don't have these ghost neighborhoods and our housing can stay for our workforce. Incentive programs to fill in infill housing, maybe have people who have a house but have a large lot to sell part of it off and split it. Work with local governments and use the tools we have out there like tax increment financing is a great way to reduce costs again to build infrastructure. Really analyze our highest and best use of our public lands and how we could potentially use some of those for housing because this is a local crisis. And if we don't have housing for our community, it will affect us in the long run. So it is something we should look at how our public lands are being used. And then provide tax incentives for housing developments. And if you've heard of a pilot program, the city of Petoskey and Bear Creek Township have passed pilots for existing housing developments. It's called payment in lieu of taxes. And the city of Petoskey recently passed one for a potential development called the Lofts at Lumber Square. We're hoping that gets approved by the state, but as of yet, we haven't heard if that will happen. So that's what the housing issue is. You can see it's a complicated issue. We're here just trying to sort of a call for action, let everybody know they can do something. If you're interested, the Homes for Our Future website that Housing North put together has some great things on what you as an individual or a business can do. You can endorse their campaign, which helps with their statewide advocacy, show up at meetings to support housing developments, and just, be here to learn and keep learning about the issues. So that is our housing problems. That's all I have for you today. And I'm happy to answer any questions and hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, let's take a few minutes for some questions. I just want to say, I know this is a huge hurdle and it's this multifaceted crisis that we have, but your presentation was very well put together and gave me a better understanding. So thank you for that. I kept thinking of questions and then you answered them. So if anybody else has a question, please feel free.
Hey, Emily.
Uh-huh.
How are you doing? Thanks for the presentation. It was really good. I guess my first question is, I know a few years ago, your stance on first floor residential was that, not in the downtown area. And I just want to know if that's changed at all. And if it's even possible to build units for under $1 million in the downtown area on the first floor.
I still believe our downtown on the first floor, we should not in the central business district. I still do not believe we should have first floor residential. But I think there's lots of room for second and third floor. That's just in the central business district.
Emily,
Yeah.
if you want to, is there incentives for people for doing land donations? Like if somebody wanted to donate land for housing, is there some sort of tax incentive that they could take advantage of?
Yeah, there are ways you could donate like to a nonprofit. So it would be a tax write-off. So that would be the incentive.
And what nonprofits could you donate to for that?
There's a great organization called Northern Homes Community. I always forget their name, but they're a housing land trust. So that's one place you could donate to. There's some housing developers, nonprofit housing developers that can also accept the land. So we'll be trying to figure out where it could go. There's also something called a bargain sale. It's the same thing like the land conservancies use, where you sell the property at a bargain rate and you take the assessed value and you take that difference and you can get the tax write-off on that piece. So that is something we've been looking at. There's a couple properties that I've been interested in that salmon color, and how we could potentially get those properties maybe at a bargain sale in order to do some development.
Thanks.
Great question. Thank you guys. And thank you so much for that. I'm sure that seeing the report that you talked about statistics would be very interesting too. All right. Any other questions come up? I know we have your contact information, so thank you, Emily.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.